Hello and welcome to the October Council Update. I'm Council Member Justin Olsen, and I'm joined today by the City of Cottage Grove's Park and Recreation Director, Zach Dockter. Welcome, Zach.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. We've got a lot of upcoming issues on our November ballot for this year's election, and I really want to encourage everybody watching at home to get out and vote. We've got school board members with 4 different seats that are up for election. The school district also has 2 referendum questions, one of which is an operating referendum, and the other which is a technology referendum. And then of course the City of Cottage Grove also has a referendum question on the ballot with respect to the proposed community center. And that's why we're so lucky to have Zach here with us today. So what I was hoping to do is ask Zach a few questions based on some of the more common things I'm hearing from the public. Would that be okay?
Been answering a lot of questions and I'm happy to do it.
Perfect, thank you. So Zach, one of the first questions that I want to ask that I'm hearing from the public is the price of the community center is $39.2 million, and that's the number that will be on the ballot. But the community center will be paid for using bonding, which means it's sort of like buying a house, right? So can you explain a little bit about how that works to the public?
Yeah, the house analogy is a great one. So when you buy a house, you have a mortgage for the purchase of the house and the property you live on, and that covers that cost. But you still have, maintenance of the property if you need that. So that's where the operational component comes in. So the $39.2 million is for the mortgage payment per se, and we'll have bonds for those, and then there'll be operational revenue and expenses that go with the operation of the facility as well.
Perfect, thank you. So I remember when I bought my first house, my real estate broker said, look, the price of the house is X, but then there's also the price of the money, because the bank is going to lend you the money and you're going to pay interest on that. With this project, there's a lot of different ways that it could be funded. I know that the city's plan, should the referendum pass, would be to bond for the $39.2 million. But there's a lot of different ways to do that. We could have a 30-year bond, we could have a 20-year bond, or we could have multiple bonds which we would issue as the project phases in. So for example, year 1 is one bond, year 2 is another bond. The question I hear a lot is, how much interest are we going to pay on the $39.2 million? And I know that's a really tough question.
Hard question.
Yeah, so rough estimates from talking to our finance director, Robin Rowland, if we were to do a one-time issuance of a 20-year bond, the interest at today's rates would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $14 million. If we were to do a 30-year bond, that goes up to about $27 million in interest. But again, there's a lot of different ways to pay for this thing, and the bonding could be gradually done over time as the project phases in which case those interest numbers would change. So we'll have to kind of play that by ear. But Zach, you brought up the operating costs. Can you tell the public a little bit more about what you mean when you say operating?
Yeah, I mean, operating is what it takes to run the facility and provide the services of that facility. So, for instance, the outdoor pool will need lifeguards, it'll need management, it'll need maintenance and repairs, and that goes for the entire facility. So those are the costs that we need to cover. Now, fortunately, there's revenue to cover a lot of those costs. So that's our job, is to figure out, the services provided, what services can and should be charged for. But we study other community centers and we study the market and determine what are those services we can provide at a fee to help run the operation as efficiently as possible, once again, and not putting up too many barriers for use.
Understood. So even though the operating costs, if you look at similar facilities, for example, Egan, New Hope, Apple Valley, they may run into the $1 to $2 million per year range to operate. Those costs can be offset, like you were saying, by user fees. So if I'm a resident in the city of Cottage Grove, is there a fee for me to use this community center should it pass?
Depends on the part of the facility you're using and what services you're trying to get access to. So an example is the aquatic center. Yep, there's user fees for that, and there'll be resident discount rates on those, but we'll compare ourselves to the market, just like the other community pools, and we'll figure out what the right rate is, give our residents a discount, and charge those fees. Now, on the aquatic center, on an outdoor aquatic center, typically they'll recover most or all of their cost through revenue. Same thing with the sports dome, same thing with the leased spaces that we're providing, and same with the indoor playground. But there's areas that don't cover their costs. The meeting spaces, some of those common areas, obviously the outdoor landscaping and parking lot and things like that. So those are areas that don't cover their costs. So at the end of the year, at the end of a year, we expect about a $100,000 to $250,000 subsidy of the facility, where people might be seeing that $1 per month operational cost that we're projecting. So $1 per family per month for operational costs.
Perfect. So that would be sort of the money left after all of the fees are gathered for use.
Exactly.
Okay. Now I know a number of these other facilities have gone so far as to award naming rights to certain business entities, et cetera. Is that something that we might consider if the community center referendum should pass?
We already had some preliminary conversations with marketing companies, so we know there's interest there, but we thought it was a little bit preemptive to start putting pen to paper before we actually have the referendum vote, right? So once the community decides on whether to move forward with the community center, then we'll start those negotiations again. And also, we want to make sure that we're getting the best bang for the buck when we enter the negotiations. It's a little bit hard to probably get the best value on those deals when there's not a project in place right away.
Sure. So you've had some preliminary conversations, but until it's actually real, it's a little more difficult to funnel that down into a hard number that might be utilized to offset some of the costs. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct.
Perfect, thank you. Now, one of the other things that the city of Cottage Grove has done is we've actually applied for a federal grant to help offset some of the infrastructure costs for this area. Whether the community center should go forward or not, this grant money will be used for infrastructure that would serve the Shops at Cottage View site, which is where the community center is proposed to go should it pass the referendum. The federal government is looking at an award of about $3 million to the city of Cottage Grove, which still needs to pass through Congress. And the city of Cottage Grove would also contribute some funding to help pay for the things that we need in order to spur development on this site. Again, whether the community center passes or not, we're looking at things like underground sewer pipes, water pipes, electrical, etc. All of the things that we would need in order to ensure that this site is ready for development one way or the other. So that too could help to offset a bit of the cost should the $39.2 million referendum actually get approved by the voters. Now, one other thing that I've been hearing a lot about, Zach, is the dome, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier. So a sports dome, can you sort of explain what that is and how it works and how that might serve the public?
Sure. Sports Dome is a facility that offers indoor turf space, potentially year-round, and that's one of the questions we've been hearing. Is it year-round or is it 6 months? There's still options for both, and that's something that we'll talk with the council through should the referendum pass of what's the most efficient use and what gets the best use of the dome as well. So you have to balance that. There's, if you leave the dome up, there's efficiencies in maintaining the dome material and not taking it up and putting it down. But there's also potentially more use if you take it down and you have an outdoor turf space. So all things we need to debate and talk about of what the best use of our dollars are and what the best use of the facility will be. So conversations we'll continue to have, but there's options still out there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Now, I know many people in the public have lots of questions about this potential referendum and whether or not the community center is a good idea for the city of Cottage Grove at this time and in this place, or whether it isn't. We're here to educate. That's truly what we want to do. We want to try to help people make an informed decision. And so I would strongly encourage anybody watching this at home who has questions to reach out to one of your council members or Mayor Bailey or to one of our staff members, the best option of which would probably be Zach, since he's the Park and Recs Director. And on the city's website, you'll find all of the contact information for Zach, for your council members, and for the rest of the city staff. Again, we're here to educate. We definitely want to help people make an informed decision. So if you have questions, now's the time to reach out. As a reminder, early voting has already started in Washington County. So if you wanted to vote early at the Washington County Service Center here in Cottage Grove, you can do that. You can vote in person, you can do an absentee ballot, and then of course we have the general election as we do the first Tuesday in November every time there's an election. I can't stress enough how important it is to vote for your school board members. Those people are very important, and the fact is the city of Cottage Grove relies very much on School District 833 being a strong, robust, well-respected school district in order for our community to grow. You also have 2 school referendum questions to vote on this year, and those are both very important. As I said earlier, one's an operating referendum, one is a technology referendum. And then last but certainly not least, as we've been talking about, the proposed community center in the city of Cottage Grove. So for the council update, I'm Councilmember Justin Olsen. Once again, thank you to our Parks and Recreation Director, Dockter, for joining me today. And I look forward to all of your questions on the community center so you can make an informed decision when you vote.